Broadcasting live from the great city of Manchester, England. This is The Richie Allen Show on davidike.com. It's The Richie Allen Show, brought to you in association with davidike.com. And now, live from Manchester, England, here is Richie Allen.
And it's Wednesday's show. It's the 21st of October 2015. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope you've had a nice day. And you're looking forward to 2 hours of spin-free news. Well, I say spin-free. I have opinions, of course. I won't deny that. Lots coming up in this particular programme. Coming up in hour one, brand new to The Richie Allen Show, making his debut on The Richie Allen Show, is a man called Dana Durnford. Now, he's a very interesting man indeed. Yesterday, as mentioned on this programme, Japan's Labour Ministry confirmed the first case of cancer connected with radiation poisoning for a former Fukushima employee. Now, Dana Durnford is an adventurer, a sailor. He's also an expert on nuclear power, and he believes the Japanese government and the world's media are covering up the real effects of the disaster, the environmental impact of the disaster. And I've been listening to Dana talk to colleagues of ours in the United States, and he thinks that the Pacific Ocean is in a state of such decay that it is unfathomable, no pun intended, to the vast majority of men, women and children in the world. So Dana Durnford joins me from British Columbia. It's 21 minutes past the hour. To find out more about my first guest, go to the website thenuclearproctologist.org. That's thenuclearproctologist.org. He is a frog in my throat. He's a fascinating man. I mentioned at the top of the programme that he's an expert on the devastating effects of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. He's also an adventurer. And he's been doing a lot of media recently to talk about what exactly is going on with respect to the attempts to clean up or to fix what happened in Fukushima, but more importantly, what it's doing to the Pacific Ocean and what it's doing to the west coast of the US and beyond. Like I said, it's thenuclearproctologist.com, it's .org, thenuclearproctologist.org, in fact. He's in British Columbia, which is a beautiful part of the world. Let's welcome to the programme Dana Durnford. Dana, thanks for taking the call. How are you?
I'm good, Richie. I'm really enjoying your vocals, actually. Kind of making me homesick.
Ah, you see. Where are you from originally, or where's the family from?
I'm originally from the east coast of Canada, a little place, Newfoundland.
Oh, cool. Well, Newfoundland is amazing because I'm from Waterford City, and you will know this, but many of our listeners won't. A lot of the Newfoundland accent is pretty similar to the Waterford accent, and a lot of people way back when left Waterford, left Cork, left Kerry, and ended up in that part of the world. But of course, you will know that.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a very distinct accent too. On top of that, and it's just I don't hear it very often, so I was really liking it that time. You got a really strong, it's a really nice accent. I know some of my listeners were telling me during the live stream they don't miss your show, and so I made sure I put that out there so people could find you. And once again, Fukushima, of course, we got 30 minutes, I guess, is it?
Yeah, we have about 30 minutes, Dana, yeah.
So it's if most people haven't heard my narrative, you strap yourselves in for sure. It's a very strong narrative, and you can't have a conversation about these reactors without sounding alarmist, and you'll sound like a fearmonger no matter how you try to ease into the conversation. It's impossible to talk about even in the lingo without overwhelming people. And people shouldn't be overwhelmed by something, but they are, because the misinformation, as you're familiar with, how that works in every aspect of our lives, is very strong in the nuclear industry. And for 70 years, they have propagated out a paradigm that radiation fallout or radiation accidents are the equivalent of bananas and potato chips and walking in the sunshine, getting on airplanes, dental x-rays. And these things are known as homeostasis, where you can't get any more radiation of that type in your body. Your body regulates you like a car regulates, cruise control regulates a car, or a thermostat regulates your home temperatures. Your body regulates it, and it's known as homeostasis. And so when you take that original product, that's homeostasis, and you added an extra electron to it through the nuclear bombardments of neutrons, you change the atomic weight of the element. And so that element, and there's thousands of them now that are created, they're man-made elements. The sun doesn't create them. The sun creates the elements, we destroy them. And so these elements, nothing on the planet has ever encountered it before. Nothing in the food chain all the way up through it has ever encountered it. And it has an adverse reaction immediately in the human bodies, or mammals or animals, and particularly microscopic animals. It's very devastating to them. And what's going on is that when you ingest an atom, it takes 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years for a cancer to manifest, to be diagnosed, to become a hard tumor. It's a very long process anyway. But when you start ingesting many of these atoms, and you will get a cancer from them, no matter how small it is, because it has this extra electron atomic weight added onto it, and it's not from this universe anymore. That's why we have terrorist laws. That's why we have waste repository sites and nuclear regulatory agencies. Is because we recognize the elements that we create as being harmful to everything else that's indigenous to this solar system, not just planet Earth. And so that's really something bizarre. And that's why we have weapons about space laws, so that you don't put these weapons actually into space, even though we know we do. And we do put them on satellites and send them to other planets. There is laws where people try to not do that. And so when we released it in such a large amount at Chernobyl, Ireland, Scotland, UK, you still can't sell land, deer that was contaminated from Chernobyl, and you still can't eat meat or drink some of the milk in those places, not just Europe, because radiation contaminated the entire European countries. Now, Kofi Annan in 2000 said there was 3,000 children that were being treated because of Chernobyl. 3 million, children being treated from, and a lot of these will die, a lot of these will have huge problems their entire life, and it costs an enormous amount of sacrifices by their loved ones and themselves to deal with these autoimmune deficiencies associated with radioactive materials. And it's well known through studies on dogs. Dr. Raymond Gilmedy from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute in New Mexico has 94 peer-reviewed academic studies on beagle dogs and beagle puppies. And so that's not a very nice subject for people, I know. But he's still doing those studies of plutonium, americium, neptunium on these animals. And what he showed was that within 3 years, on a study of 144 dogs, 94 of them had bone tumors within the first 3 years, and lung tumors and other tumors to all the dogs within 4 to 5 years. Now, dog studies, he correlates it that you can extract it as a human problem immediately under those pretexts. Now, all the reactors in Japan have plutonium into it. And so 94 studies shown that it kills the dogs no matter how small of a dose they got. Is significant because a gram of this stuff produces more atoms than every grain of sand on every beach on every planet, on this planet, on every planet, on every beach. And when you're talking about 5 million pounds versus a gram, you're talking about an invisible snowstorm. So California, for instance, had 1,500 of these sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs phenomenons show up per cubic meter of air. And a cubic meter of air is roughly, where you're stood up to. And so if you're breathing in that, you're breathing in more than one particle at a time. And they will sequester in your organs. But generally, plutonium, it likes your bones too, more particular. Now,
Dana, can I just jump in there?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So what we're saying is, now you have to bear in mind, and I'm not patronizing you when I say this.
No, it's okay.
You're really smart and you understand this. I'm Joe Soap Me. Some of these terms I don't understand. What are we saying? I mean, we know that it was catastrophic what happened in March 2011. From what I just heard there, you're saying is that people in British Columbia, say people in Seattle, people in California, people in Mexico, they're in serious trouble right now. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Yes. And so I'm just trying to build it because I know we got 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And you can interject anytime with any
Yeah, and I don't
kind
like
of,
doing that because I'm absolutely
okay.
gripped by what you're saying, Dana.
And so you should be. And that's the importance of it, is that now the majority of this would have fell out in the ocean, but it gets reliberated with rain. And there's tens of thousands of miles of rain picked up off the ocean every day, and that's distributed to all the continents around the planet. This stuff, when it hits the upper and lower troposphere, it takes about 10 years to rain out, but it went much higher than that. And so forest fires in the Asian Pacific, for instance, have been modeled as pollution indexes in other countries, particularly North America and Ireland, Scotland, and just right around the entire planet. So a forest fire is a great big particle. These particles I'm talking about are 1/10,000th the size, but because they're created in a forest fire, they're so hot, they go very high, and they're distributed for a very long time, and they take many years to rain out on top of that, but they do go right around this entire planet in about 40 days and continue to do that for many years until they're rained out. But the radiation keeps, because it's so small, it keeps being reliberated, and it hovers at ground level on top of that. Now, so what we done was we covered 9,000 headlines about this, and then we put together an operation. We flushed out every aspect of it to make sure it was real. And then we put together an operation to go out and look at the coastline and see if we can notice any kind of impact, because that was where you would normally go. Originally, you would go look at the microscopic world and not at the whales, not at the porpoises, not at the tunas, because they're so far up the food chain. Not that you shouldn't look at them, but it's just that originally you would go look at the microscopic world, and if there was damage, then you would look at every other part of the marine food chain out there. And so what we've done is 15,000 miles, and out of that 15,000 miles was 260 days of the 365 on the ocean, up to 5 months without getting home. And because the damage was so severe, we had to see if this was symmetrically throughout the entire coast of Canada. And so the last expedition, I just finally finished it, 5 expeditions altogether, was 6 weeks on the West Coast. And that was the definitive answer when I finished that one. And that was also, the entire coastline was wiped out. And so I'll just break that down for everybody in about a 3-minute run. And it's coming at you quite quick, I know, and it's quite devastating. But you have to listen to the whole interview, and
we'll get you back for a part 2. Just before you go into this 3 minutes about the expedition and what you saw, I want to do a very quick recap. Dana Durnford is on the line to us live from British Columbia. I've had a good look at this man over the last few weeks, as I should do as a producer and presenter, and he's credible. He is credible beyond any words I can say to say he's credible. He is an expert in what nuclear fallout does to the environment, to the sea, to the air, to the land. He's an adventurer. He's a sailor. He's been looking at this since it happened. He's been back-checking his facts against what happened in Chernobyl and what happened elsewhere over the years. This is absolutely serious stuff, this. It isn't fear-mongering. It isn't playing that silly game that some alternative news programmes do, this doomsday, end-of-the-world nonsense. It's none of that. This is the stuff that's not been disseminated on national and commercial media because they're burying it. They are burying this. We know this to be absolutely true. Dana, by the way, Dana's website is thenuclearproctologist.org. It's thenuclearproctologist.org. Right, my friend, what have you seen on these expeditions when you're out at sea? What are you seeing? Talk to us about the wildlife. Talk to us about the birds, the animals, what you would expect to see, what you're not expecting to see. The floor is yours.
Okay, really, really, really good setup. Thank you, Richie. So, folks, this is tough, I'm sure, for anybody who loves the ocean or just loves life itself. Now, British Columbia is unique, and it has 26,000 islands. And in that 26,000 islands, there's an established residential population of marine invertebrates and life, and floras and faunas and insects and birds and shellfish. And so I had to encompass all of that. Normally, a researcher will go out and just study one bird or one insect or one fauna or such and such. I had to encompass it all because it was all missing. And so what was missing was 5,600 species. But in comparison, that's just a generalization of the species. And there's 4 million in the Pacific Ocean altogether. But they consider many researches over the many decades of the coastline have showed this many to be the residential. And these numbers are 600 algae, which are kelps, and you would expect to find 400 to 500 in any tidal pool at it, no matter where you went. And then you would get 70 species of sponges. You would get 76 species of starfish. You would get 78 species of sea anemones. And remember, these all comes in very bright, different colors per species. So when you're talking, so now you would have around 6,500 species of the invertebrates without the backbones. You would have all the shellfish, the snails, the mollusks, the periwinkles. You would end up with all the mussels. The mollusks would cover every single rock that it can get onto in herds. On top of this, that is where the nursery itself of the Pacific Ocean is too. And so the sunlight penetrates the ocean for the first 30 feet. Very significant. You still get your colors, but after that you get shades of gray. And I was a commercial diver for 14 years in both oceans. And so I 6 hours a day on the ocean floor. So I ran 14 commercial operations in the ocean. And I have a unique perspective of that. And because I had a company 8 years ago, called Marine Channel Productions Limited, where I foresaw thousands of cameras underwater, and I was actively trying to do that. And the species, there's 100 species left on the coastline, and of the 5,600 residential. But the underwater footage was shocking also. The coastline underwater footage showed that all the shellfish were missing. Now, a shellfish, like a mussel, for instance, when it dies, the shell opens up. It's a very visible thing. And so as the camera's going underwater, we don't see any shellfish down there. This is the most bizarre thing that anybody can even imagine, because the beaches are made of shellfish shells over millenniums. So how can you have shellfish beaches without shellfish? Is a really startling observation.
Did you expect to see that, or did that come as a massive shock to you?
That was probably the biggest shock. Besides the insects were missing along the entire coastline, and the bird species. There was supposed to be 148 residential and 167 migratory, and out of all the species, I've only counted 11 of bird species, but none of them were in the herds or in population wises. And in context of that, on my last expedition, I ran to the very north of Canada, to the border of Alaska, and I'm right down at the south end of Canada, and I counted 400 birds. Now, every mile I should count 1,000 to 5,000 birds, and many varieties of them. But also during the trip, I was there when the phytoplankton was supposed to bloom and the krill was supposed to come in. These are the bases of the food chain, the oxygen and the carbon sequestering chain on this planet. 50% of the oxygen is produced by the phytoplankton. There was no evidence of that at all. And during the major season, I shouldn't be able to see more than 2 feet below the boat. And my underwater camera footage was perfect all the way to the ocean floor the whole time. And at nighttime, I would leave. I have a daylight system on the boat for nighttime. And you couldn't get enough krill to come into the light or any other species to really get pictures underwater. It was absolutely still. Most of the anchorages, and I stayed by myself out there for up to 5 months at a time, where there was literally no birds at any given time, except for about 4 different times where I was anchored to. And it was lonely and quiet. Now, startling enough, as I went ashore into these 26,000 islands, because I would take baths in the rivers at the low tide zones or high tide zones, and I wasn't finding any spiders in the woods, and I wasn't finding any birds in the woods. And so the picture now, to wrap this all together for us, is getting even worse, as if that's not bad enough. We now have no snow in our mountains. And so the tritium was an enormous amount. Canada now has 7,000 becquerels in a liter of water for our drinking water standards, and they never announced why that is. But that's 7 million becquerels of tritium. Now, tritium got a 12.5-year half-life, and half-lives are times 10. That's how they obfuscate it all the time, is by always not telling you the other side of that story.
Yeah.
And so now, with no snow in the mountains, the snow in British Columbia, all these mountains, would regulate the outlets, the streams, the salmon rivers, and everything with cold water all summer long to keep the temperatures regulated. And so that wasn't there this year. And of course, that snowpack took thousands of years to produce. The tritium doesn't allow the ice to crystallize in the mountains, and now it's missing. We've never seen that in the history of this planet.
And that's borne out because
the entire coast of Canada.
That's right. Now, we go out on commercial radio, on Fab Radio, so there will be people listening to this and they'll be sceptical. Speak to
Sure.
them, Dana. Speak to them
Absolutely.
because they're going to say, come on, we'd have heard about this. This would have been in the news. Why is it not in the news?
It's $1 trillion a year industry. There's 1 million corporations dependent upon it, all nations. But the biggest reason for it is the future is laser weapons, and that's tied directly to the isotopes. So the more crazier the isotope you can produce, the more deadlier the lasers, the future generations of lasers can be. And so they can't give up the technology without giving up the laser technology at the same time. They can only do so much with the ruby that they use for the lasers. And so lasers, a lot of people don't even accept that, but it's just celebrated its 50-year anniversary. We were cutting 3 feet of steel 50 years ago with lasers. Who knows what they're really doing? As I'm sure you covered many times, everything we see is obsolete technology. But I mean, if they find out this, what I'm saying is pertinent and real, and it's impossible to take that away, unfortunately, they lose all their pensions immediately. Plus, they lose the respect of their friends, families, loved ones, acquaintances, neighbors, and they lose that prominence. And they also will be vilified just outlandishly in every context of that word, because you can't hide the death of the Pacific Ocean. The mass die-offs already we've seen. The herring are gone. The anchovies are gone. The shrimp are gone. The crustaceans are gone. The krill is gone. Mackerel is gone. The squid is gone. And so these are the migratory feeders. These are, and everything I cover is, like I said before, I went on the ocean, I covered 9,000 headlines. So it's not me. And I use all academic studies. I had 25,000 supporting documentations before we launched it on the ocean. And we done that in frustration that nobody had went into the proper places to do the studies. Instead, they were postulating about how much radiation the tuna would pick up when they went past Japan. But the ocean current travels at 5 miles an hour. At 24 hours times 45 days, that's 5,500 miles. So the first plume gets here in 45 days, and every day behind it is a plume behind it. But taken in the context of Chernobyl, stopped after 10 days, and Chernobyl was equal to 400 Hiroshima bombs. These things were 3 times the size. These were 100% meltdowns. Chernobyl was a 30% meltdown. And these reactors are now breeder reactors. And so that as they're consuming the rocks and the cement and the rebar every time you have a tremor down there, or rocks that fall down or they land on, they produce ionized radioactive elements, and they are ejected into the ocean and into the atmosphere. And so even if we were to stop the reactors in Japan right now, we can't save the Pacific Ocean. And so they can't hide this much longer. They were hoping that the ocean would dilute it, but you can't dilute radiation. You can only disperse it. It has millions of years of half-life. And the problem was that the reactors were using fuel. What they were doing was reclaiming plutonium, reclaiming uranium from missiles from the silos from the Cold War. And so this stuff is already 2 million times worse than it was originally because it went through a chain reaction. That's what it does. And when you put it through a chain reaction again and you have a detonation, everything is a hot particle, because it's 2 billion times worse than what it was originally. And that's how the math works with this. Before you put it through the chain reaction, you can pick it up in your hand. After, a pound will kill everybody, 1,500 people in 20 minutes. It'll kill everybody in the front row in a minute and everybody in the back row. That's a pound of it. But if you atomize and aerosol it, you're talking a gram of it is more atoms in every grain of sand on every beach on the planet. So it doesn't take long for this stuff to show up in the microscopic world, because there was so much came out of there, because there's so much coming out of there constantly, and because we only send in the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society.
Do you remember that? Holy shit. Excuse me for swearing, but do you remember that? We reported that at TPV in London, that they were sending in, they were getting homeless men, they were getting sick men to go in there.
Right.
Then I just want to read some tweets, right? Because massive amount of tweets have come in, and then I've got some more questions for you. Staggering stuff. Dana Durnford is on the line to us from British Columbia. It's 17 minutes to the top of the hour. Emlyn was on to say on Twitter, we have 3 more mega reactors coming to the UK, Hinkley Point, Somerset, to start in the coming weeks, producing power by 2025. I think Emlyn is disgusted by that, as am I. Mike was on to ask, does Dana know about Ivan McFadden and the ocean is broken? He sailed between Japan and California. I'm sure Dana Dana does. I'm going to quickly go through a few more of these because I'll get all the hassle later on, Dana, for not reading them.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Val Kyrie on Twitter says, by the time the children grow up, all the animals will be dead, if it's not sooner than that. Just moving along, loads and loads of comments from Joanne, from Ronnie. Thanks for all your tweets and all your messages. Karen in Glasgow in Scotland says, this is awful. Andrea was on to say that after Chernobyl there was a 10-year ban on taking mushrooms out of the ground. She still wouldn't do it. Mushrooms can't be found there anymore, says Andrea. Alan was on to say, this is an email from Alan. He says, Richie, the Pacific Ocean is around about 65 million square miles. Is Dana really saying that every species in 65 million square miles is in irreversible decline? Is it, Dana?
4 million species are, yeah. Because what happened was, if we took out the 5,600 indigenous species on the coastline, the other 4 million would fill up that gap immediately. The ocean didn't recede itself, see? It didn't recede the coastline. So if I went down and plowed in a healthy coastline, it would recede itself from stuff down deeper and on both sides of it. The ocean didn't do it. I documented it on my site, so I don't know what to say to him. But
yeah.
Now what happens is it comes over, it hits the mountains, it washes back down to the coastline on top of that. And so maybe it's the coastline that's so radioactive, life can't take there. But on the other side of that one is, how come I couldn't find the phytoplankton when I was out there for 5 months during the bloom? And why did Canada try to create an artificial phytoplankton bloom 2 years ago? John Disney in Mass at Queen Charlotte got almost $3 million to create an artificial bloom. So if a glass of salt water would have 75 to 100 million phytoplankton and a billion other creatures and eggs and larvae, how come the ocean didn't recede the coastline was the postulation that I used, yeah.
Carl is in Canberra, Australia, and asked, why is the west coast of Canada and US being affected so badly? Now, that leads into another question from Fiona, and that's on Twitter. Fiona is listening in Manchester. And let me just bring that up. Fiona says, depending on who you believe, there are several hundred or several thousand gallons of contaminated wastewater still pouring into the Pacific Ocean every day. We're not hearing the truth in the media, obviously, asks Fiona. Please ask Dana, what's the truth? Dana, what is the truth? How many thousands or hundreds of gallons of contaminated groundwater, wastewater, whatever you want to call it, are still pouring into the sea every day?
They're pouring water in on the reactor constantly, but now, you got to think about the dispersals when the original detonation happened. These were very heavy dispersals. And what they done was, as they cleaned up Japan, if you want to call it that, they were dumping it into the rivers and the estuaries and the lakes. And so this stuff will put out Beckles every second. This stuff will split atoms and create its own isotopes, et cetera, et cetera. Now, at the same time, they're digging up communities, they're taking it to other prefectures and then burning it. Incinerators. And so this stuff is created at 5, 6, 7,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. 3,000 Fahrenheit incinerators is not going to harm it. You're just going to re-liberate it immediately back into the environment. And I've had flushed this out with many headlines from different medias about it over the last number of years. And it seems that they're intent on burning about 1 billion tons of radioactive debris this way. And so it's just going to get worse. But the reactors themselves are hemorrhaging all of them. They're pouring water on it. The basements were broken. So the water runs over the fuel product, not counting what the rain, typhoons, and snow does to these places. It washes it back down into the ocean. And think about everything around it is getting radiated at the same time, and that's getting washed into the environment too. And so it's a perpetual breeder machines. This is why we have the nuclear regulatory, that this stuff doesn't go that way, where it doesn't become unhinged and be able to create its own. That's why we worry about dirty bombs in the community, of course, is because this stuff is so dangerous, even in low qualities. But, if they have an accident, all of a sudden it's like a banana or a potato chip walking in sunshine. And so it's that direct conflict. But everything that's happening in Japan generally immediately comes towards North America within 3 or 4 days in the jet stream, and it's still going. But under those plants is a huge river. They built it on an old river bed. It's bedrock. It's been there for 1,000 years. The river wore it down to the bedrock, and they put the plant above this about 100 feet. And so everything that goes down gets washed out from that old riverbed. You can't stop an old riverbed even with a structure above it. And so it's being flushed out. Now, that is their backup plan. They do that no matter where they put a nuclear power plant. But let's add in one more thing before I let Richie jump back in there. The most important part of this is that tsunami ran across 500 miles of the coastline. And that tsunami not only took out Fukushima, it took out all the nuclear power plants on the coastline. They just didn't report on it. And the only power plants they're going to reopen are the ones inland or on the other side of Japan, not on the open ocean side, because they all melted down, burnt down. They lost their inventories, their storage, their fuel pools on the land. There was an enormous amount of this material. It wasn't reported. Once again, the mixed oxide fuel at number 3 alone makes Fukushima 2 million times worse than any other current reactor on this planet.
Now,
and because, go ahead.
Sorry, I got to ask you this. 2 questions. One, are Japanese fish being sold in Europe today that might not be safe? Number 1. But number 2, and this has been bugging me, because I understand everything you've said. What are fishermen off the coast of Canada and off the coast of the western seaboard of Canada and the United States? What are they catching, Dana?
Yeah, they're catching fish because fish are further up the food chain, right? And so fish are still hanging on. Whales are still hanging on. But the 38 whales that died on the coastline, just digress 1 second, they were all krill eaters. They starved to death. The mass die-off of the birds and the mammals on the coastline, they had starved to death because so the squid failed, the anchovies failed, the herring failed, all these industry failed. And so fish are basically cannibalizing each other at this stage. The whales, and they were all emaciated. All the bird die-offs, the auklets, they were dependent upon krill. They were all emaciated. And we have endless reports now of mass die-offs. And scientists are starting to ask that question. Maybe it is Fukushima. But because the cover-up, you can't get a job in the industry without being part of the good old boys club. You can't be out speaking in the media. And so why don't we get nuclear scientists out speaking about this? Why do we get marine chemists? Why don't we get marine biologists? And, these are questions that people need to ask themselves, because the only 2 people that are allowed to speak, of course, are the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution's frontmen, Jay Cullen and Ken Buesler. And that's all you really truly hear about. But
it's funny you say that, Dana, because you hear those guys on Sky and on the BBC as well, those same guys. You just don't get another
just
opinion.
2 of them, yeah.
This programme has listeners with a variety of opinions. One of the prevailing opinions on disasters like these are that sometimes these are deliberately created. And some of our listeners will think that man-made weather technology has been used and all of that. Now, I don't know whether you're interested in any of that or whether it's occurred to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be talked or spoken about today. But is it something you've ever considered? Have you heard these theories? What do you make of them?
Well, in Vietnam, they made it rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail for an extra couple of months, washing their bridges and communities with weaponized clouds. I know in Britain, about 10 years before that, they finally admitted to washing out a community with weather warfare technology. And that in Vietnam, we chemtrailed the sky also for 9 years. So this technology was already refined. They weren't going to get rid of it. And we know HAARP is real. I've seen interviews on these people. They have benign reasons for using it, but they do admit that under the wrong guise, it could be used as a weapon, and that manifestation has showed up throughout this planet, and that we know other countries have these same technologies, and that, it just keeps replicating. Anything bad, they'll replicate it right away everywhere else, apparently. So when it comes to Japan, there's major speculations, and we can, some other show we can definitely go way down the road on that. I can certainly contribute to it in my I can back up certain documentation about it. Yeah, for sure.
Well, we'll definitely do a follow-up on that. We will. We've had guests on the programme before who've put forward those theories, but your background is so interesting and so unique.
Thank you.
For you to be saying that, Dana, I got to say again, folks.
I studied up on it.
You've read up on it. You've been out there. You've been on the ocean. It's the nuclearproctologist.org. Dana, what do you want listeners to this programme to do with this information? What can anybody do?
Well, first off, if you had 1 million people call up UVic and tell them to fire Jay Cullen, we wouldn't have to listen to him no more. And the next guy definitely wouldn't be saying that stuff again, because we can have 1 million people. So we can get rid of the apologists, dethrone them, and so that's how you would do it. And then you would try to level out the playing field with somebody that's a bit more talking about the subject instead of avoiding the subject. And once again, what we got to do as a sign of good fate is to pass out natural seeds of food throughout all the communities, and because that has the nutrients in it, and I'm sure your audience is aware of the genetically modified critters out there you got to avoid.
Yeah.
Well, they call it food, I call it critters. And because they engineered out all the mineral, micro, macro nutrients to 20 parts per million, and engineered in toxins and dioxins and glyphosates and formaldehydes that prohibit you from uptaking nutrients. And so even if you have a chocolate bar and a really good meal of no GMO, you still have a hard time uptaking nutrients. So if everybody was to get rid of the GMO, if we were to plant organic foods throughout all of our communities instead of using pesticides and everything else and mowing lawns, we plant really natural food, healthy food, we can extend the life of the insect world, the mammal world, the animal world, the human world, and everybody else just a little bit longer till we come up with some kind of technology. But we do need to go to work on coming up with technologies to filter our water, our food, and we've got to get rid of the GMOs, a sign of good fate, The planet got half a chance. But on the path we're doing right now, we're already looking 100% at a non-changeable extinction event of the Pacific Ocean. It ain't going to get any better. We're next, We're up that food chain, and we are consuming everything that is bioaccumulating it. The studies on the dogs, the beagle dogs and the beagle puppies, are not wrong. And there's 1,000 other institutions doing those studies too. And so they show definitively what this stuff is going to do to us, and we see the documentation already. It's very frightening. It's very concerning. But first off, we dethrone these people. Then we shut them all down, and we come up with alternative sources and resources and filtration systems and try to come up with a way forward. I don't have those answers. Specifically, it would take me a few hours, but I do have some really good ways forward, I think.
Do us a favour, Dana. We got to leave it there for now.
Okay.
Come back in a few weeks' time, and I don't mean the longer end of a few weeks. I mean the shorter end of a few weeks. Come back and spend an hour on the programme. Come back and do an extended interview with us.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's important. To say it's important is a ludicrous understatement. It's thenuclearproctologist.org. Get on there immediately. Dana, look, you've done a lot of these interviews today. Thanks very much for coming on and talking to us, my friend. Do come back again in the next 2 to 3 weeks. You're more than welcome. And
absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, Richie.
Marvellous. And we'll just leave it there for now. Thanks, Dana. Dana Durnford on the line to us there from British Columbia. There's a nuclearproctologist.org is his website. I don't know what to say after that. I really don't.